Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I want to talk about late stage Troika because I've told a lot of Troika stories already, and you can look them up. There's a whole Troika playlist. I've talked about the development of all three of our games. I've talked about the flat hierarchy we tried to do. I've talked about how our games there didn't have very good sales. They're all now cult classics, which is nice, I guess. I did an entire video of Troika stories with me as the bad guy that all happened during Arcanum. So the reason I'm calling this late stage Troika is I'm kind of focusing on about the last year. It's really the last 15 months. It's from the very tail end of 2003 to the very beginning of 2005, which is about a 15-month period. So it's about a year, even though it spans 3 years, at the very end of Troika. So just to sum up some things, after Arcanum shipped, we had the opportunity to get both Temple of Elemental Evil and Vampire. So we split. And I did Temple with just a few people from Arcanum, and the bulk of the Arcanum group went with Leonard and Jason on to Vampire. I think the only two people who worked on Arcanum and then with me on a Temple was Steve Moray, a programmer, and Mike McCarthy, an artist on Arcanum that became the lead artist on Temple. And everybody else, I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to think, going through all the rooms, I think we hired everybody new for Temple. So I talked about how that went. Temple went out. Good D&D simulator though. So when I got onto Vampire 2 years later, they had already been in development for a long time. I had to spend half my day doing HR stuff. So I pretty much kept my head down. I did not get involved in its design. I didn't get involved in anything with the publisher. I didn't want to get into arguments with anybody anymore. I just didn't want to do that. So Vampire went out. My involvement in Vampire, I've said, was trying to coordinate the programming team and do the AI for the boss creatures. For not even all of them, just some of them. There's a whole video on Vampire Bloodlines development. I'm bringing this up because so now we're getting to the end of Troika, and my self-confidence at this point is fairly well eroded. I couldn't help but constantly think back to Fallout and why it went so much more smoothly than the development of things at Troika. And there's a bunch of reasons probably for it, and all of these contribute a little bit. How much weight they contribute is completely up to everyone to figure out. But there were things like Fallout was made at Interplay in the context of a bigger company. So at the end, when we needed more help, there were people to come on from other projects to help us for a few months at the end. We didn't have that at Troika. Another thing was, for better or for worse, I was the final say in things on Fallout. Usually never had to do that. And on some things I wouldn't take the final say. Like, there's no way I would ever take the final say in anything art on that game. But having someone who could step in, who could have stepped in at any point and went, we're doing this. We've spent way too much time arguing about it. We're doing this. I think helped, even if that person never needed to step in and do that. It's kind of what I think I learned from the flat hierarchy. There was no final decision guy at Troika. So sometimes decisions just didn't get made or got made late or got made poorly. Sometimes democracy doesn't lead to the best decisions. So that left me at the end of Troika just feeling kind of, And just for the record, I was the one who suggested after Vampire a few months later when we couldn't get a contract, I was the one who suggested that we shut down. It wasn't Leonard, it wasn't Jason. I was the one who said, let's shut down Troika. And I'm not sure they agreed as much as they were just so exhausted, along with me and everybody else, that everyone was just tired. It was like, okay, let's just stop. In many ways, Troika was an experiment of a bunch of different things, and many of those failed. So I've talked about how I talked to Leonard years later about, hey, what went wrong with some of this stuff? And he explained one of the things was I got so passionate about things that they loved it when I was passionate with publishers and journalists, but not so much with other team members, because they felt I squashed other people's ideas, and it was hard for other team members to get their ideas in. And why this was especially true for Arcanum is we had that flat hierarchy, and we had a lot of people who were hired in right at the beginning. So a lot of people felt more ownership of Arcanum than they would for Fallout, because even by the time the first person came on to Fallout, I'd already been working on it for 6 months. And since I only had Jason Anderson and Jason Taylor for 6 months, by the time anybody besides them was hired, there was already a group who had been working on it for a year. But with Arcanum, it was different. Leonard and Jason and I all started it together, and so there was this sense of mutual ownership there. But it's interesting because I had the most interesting talk with someone from Carbine, because as I mentioned on that video, I was feeling pretty down and out after Carbine as well, and Troika and Carbine were back to back, so I was like, ugh, this is not going well. And I talked to someone who was a programmer who actually was there longer than me. He was one of the 3 programmers who was responsible for me getting hired as their boss. And I think I told you when I got hired, I'm like, why aren't you guys taking this position? And they told me why. But he told me, even though he approved my hiring, he felt threatened by me. And when he said that, I'm like, but it couldn't be about passion, because I hadn't said anything yet, except in the interviews. And he said, no, he said it was because, you were well known in the industry, and you had made Fallout, and you had run Troika, and you had made engines from scratch. And I was like, I don't understand this. You're a programmer who was on World of Warcraft from almost the beginning, and you made it. And all he could say was, he said, I felt like I was a small part of a big game, and you felt like a big part of a big game. And he went on to say, these are things that you never could see happening around you, but you made a lot of people at Carbine feel defensive, like they had to step up to prove themselves against you. You were like a whetstone or whatever. I don't know. There was also a worry that I would get all the glory for the game. And he said this was despite the fact that you distributed credit to everyone and everyone. But there was always that worry that ultimately it would be seen as a Tim Kaine game. And this is interesting because it made me look at that differently. I mean, he only told me this a few weeks ago, probably like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I was like, oh, that is an interesting thing to think about. And it's something you don't see happening around you. So it made me go back and think, okay, what lessons did I pull from Troika? What should I say in a video about late stage Troika? And I threw that Carbine one in there just because it gave me a different perspective. One, I loved working with people smarter and better than I was. I learned that lesson way back in school. I have a whole video about how I liked school and how I liked being the smaller fish. But I learned that lesson too in work. There is a sense of relief when you can turn over something to someone, whether it was code or design, knowing that it will be handled really well by that person. And even more so, if I was already doing something and somebody convinced me that their idea was better, we went with it. The Fallout ending is my famous example of I had planned a party with cake and balloons, and Leonard had a better idea of how Fallout should end, and we went with that one. So I do feel like I did take ideas from other people, but I feel bad now that they felt like it was a big uphill climb to get their idea past the hurdle. At the same time, I think one of the reasons Fallout went better than Arcanum is because there was somebody who put up that barrier and said, you want something to to go in, it's got to get over some kind of test, and all tests are ultimately subjective. So why not just have one guy be the arbitrator? It's the benevolent dictator thing I brought up before. But something else I learned from Troika, and I've mentioned this in another video, was that I was not a business guy. What's interesting about that is I worked at Obsidian for 9 years, and then the last 3 or 4 as a contractor. 3. I told Fergus that multiple times. He's a way better businessman than I am. And this is me watching how Obsidian worked and going, wow, that he did that better, that's being handled better. And I told him that several times. And I hope he heard me, because I meant that. I not only meant it heartfelt, in a heartfelt way, but also sympathetically. I've been there. I've tried these things. I tried running a business. I tried having a flat hierarchy. I tried these experiments, and they didn't always work. But I'm glad I tried them, because I would always be wondering now, should I have done this? What if I didn't? What if I hadn't done this? I tried a lot of things. However, it also has a side effect. I find it really odd when I get advice or even feedback from people who never tried this. When people who've never run their own company used to try to give me feedback on what I should do at Troika, it was always kind of like, So now I get it. I get that Ferg probably was always getting feedback from other people. So I tried to just tell him, like, hey, coming from someone who's done what you're doing a good job. And then I guess the other thing, so that was a lesson I learned, that it was nice to try things, and I'm glad I did, and it's weird to get advice from people who never try things, but love to give you advice on it. But then I guess the final thing I learned was, when you do something wrong, and you will, or you do something, but you didn't do it well, you didn't do it wrong, but you didn't do it well, and you will, when people try to explain what was going on, listen to them. Don't discount it because they haven't done it. Listen to what they're saying, because sometimes they will be giving you an idea of how to do it better the next time, even if the next time is handing it off to someone else who can do a better job than you. So it's funny, I've thought a lot about Troika. Even though we shut it down, it has been 18 years since we shut down that company. I still think about it all the time, because I probably learned so much by running Troika. So I wanted to do one more video like this where I talk about that and just call it Late Stage Troika. So I hope you liked my rambling, and I'll see you tomorrow.